Alright, so in this video or crash course or a small lecture, we'll talk about Lightning Aura components, which is part of the Lightning platform or Lightning experience, right? So this would be a guide to using Aura components in the Lightning platform. Now, before jumping into Lightning Aura components, let's understand the Lightning experience, right? So if we were to go to this org, and if I were to switch to Salesforce Classic, we see that this is the classic view that Salesforce started off with, and this is the traditional or the conventional or the tacky view that Salesforce had for years, and then it moved to the Lightning experience, which is right here. What is the difference? The UI look and feel, the speed and optimization, using latest JavaScript, and not depending on the server side a lot more, but depending on the client side, right? That's the change, and that's what Salesforce went with and is also proceeding with new releases. They are improving the Lightning version, not the classic version. So with classic, you get Visual Force to write your screen UIs, and you can create small components and pages out of it, whereas for Lightning experience you need to write Lightning Aura components to create those components, right? So this view right here is the Lightning is the classic view, whereas the Lightning experience is this right here, the one that you see regularly on your screen these days. This is your Lightning experience view. So the Lightning experience supports both Visual Force as well as Lightning components. Now the good thing about Lightning experience that Salesforce did was, even if you have Visual Force pages or components, they go well with Lightning experience, which means today if you have to embed a Visual Force page here on this Lightning page, you can do that very well. Should not be a problem. And apart from that, you definitely get Lightning components, so you can continue using any one of them. Right? Lightning experience is an app-based experience, and this app is curated by creating several components, and these components are called Lightning components, right? So if you take a look at this particular page right here, this is an entire Lightning application, the sales application, right? And this is made up of different Lightning components. So this component could be one table component, this could be one assistant component, this could be one report chart, this could be another recent record utility component. So a group of components come together to build or create an application. That is what it means. And the Lightning experience that you see is primarily the Lightning UI, which is built up of different components, which are called Lightning components. I hope the nomenclature is clear, right? But still, if you have to just clarify it one more time, Lightning experience and Lightning components, these are two different things, right? And there are two UI experiences like we talked. One is classic and the other one is Lightning. The classic uses a page-centric app. If you remember, we created Visual Force pages, right? So those were single-handed pages, right? Independent pages. But Lightning experience is more of an application-centric model, which means you can club different components together in a single page or a single screen and have them interact with each other. And these single components or nuggets that you add are called Lightning components, right? So Lightning components together build up the Lightning experience. So this is why these two terms are different things. What are the advantages of using the Lightning framework? This is very important when you understand that Visual Force does pretty much everything, but then why are we shifting to Lightning framework, right? So let's take a look at these 5 key pointers. So Visual Force has about 150 built-in components. Similarly, you have out-of-the-box components on Lightning experience also. And these are device aware, they are browser aware, and they are responsive, they are fast, and they have their own styling. So if you remember, the Visual Force pages we developed had pretty much no styling to them, right? Very basic, very minimal styling or CSS. But here you have out of the box components that support SLDS, which is Salesforce Lightning Design System. So CSS is also integrated with these components. You don't have to worry about any of that. Second thing is the performance optimization. Now what happens is, the JavaScript that acts as your client-side controller, and you have the Apex, which acts as your server-side controller. Now, JavaScript being stateful and server Apex code being stateless, you can use both of them. And the important part is, with Lightning experience or Lightning components, the Apex code, or rather the server code, is not called that often. Because with VF pages, what happened was, every time you had to get a value or re-render your page, every time it would make a server call, right? And get the latest value from your controller, be it standard, be it custom, or be it the list controller. The database server call would have to be made. But here what happens with Lightning components and Lightning experiences, that your components are capable of holding stuff on the JavaScript side or the client side. So you can store stuff by making one-time call to the server and store them on your client side, and then you can use them on your UI to show or render different things. So that is a performance improvement over VF pages. Now there is event driven architecture on Lightning components. What is that? That is nothing but you have different components on your page, right? Now how do you ensure that your components interact with each other? So you can define and register events. Like that's another custom code that you have to write, and you can create events which other components can listen to and then respond accordingly. So let's say this component is listening whether the closed value goes above $150,000, right? Once it does, it will create a task. So it is constantly listening to this particular component, and as soon as the value is updated here, a task is created in this component. So that's the kind of event driven architecture Lightning components provide. Lastly, device awareness and cross-browser compatibility. Normally with the web applications, you have to figure out everything that, if you are in this device, this is how things should look. If you're on a mobile phone, this is how things should look. But device awareness and cross-browser compatibility are handled by the Lightning framework. We don't have to worry about any of that. All right. So those were the brief advantages of having Lightning framework over the Visualforce or the classic model. Now, where can you use Lightning components? We saw that, with Visualforce pages, you can use them on Classic, or you can use them in Lightning Experience also. But where can these Lightning components be exactly used? So you can use them anywhere on the Lightning Experience, which is pretty much everywhere on the Lightning Experience. It could be on a tab, it could be on an object record detail, it could be as a button on the list view, it could be a quick action, it could be a modal, anything. Right? You can use it on the Salesforce app, which means you get flexibility of creating Lightning applications which can run on mobile, right? Because it is device aware, remember? So it is device aware, and you can use them with Visualforce pages. So if you are in Classic and you have a Visualforce page, you can still open a Lightning component from that page. Even that can be done. And lastly, under flows, the only UI based flows are the screen flows. So with screen flows also, you get to have Lightning components embedded into it. You can use the design attributes and you can call Lightning components, right? So pretty much everywhere. Now let's quickly create a component, right? Let's see how things look like, and I'll just create a 1 + 1 = 2 component, just a basic one based on what we currently need as part of our platform developer 1 requirements, based on the curriculum that we have there. I'll go to developer console, and here I'll simply say file, and here I'll just say Lightning component. Right, so I'll name this my first, or I'll just say addition component. Right, similar to how you create everything else from the file and this option right here, you have an option to create Visualforce page, Apex class, and similarly you have option to create Lightning component. The event I was talking about was this event, Lightning event, and then you have Lightning components that you create, and you can even create an application. All right, so now as soon as you create a Lightning component, I'll just say COMP, good nomenclature. If you see, I've done sentence casing, all the words are capitalized. That's a good practice. And I'll just say submit. Now before saying submit, you can create bundles with any of the following configurations. So for example, where you would be using this particular component. Would you be using this on a particular record page? Let's say would you be putting it somewhere here on the account page? If so, you can just check the Lightning record page option. Or would it be just on the home page, a normal standard Lightning page? Then you can just check the Lightning page. Or would it be a quick action? Would it be a button on the contacts page, like somewhere here on the quick action? If you want that, you can simply choose Lightning quick action. If you want to expose this component for communities, you can choose experience builder. And if you want to have a tab that opens up, like basically let's say a tab that opens up your component, you can choose this particular bundle. Now what does this do is this, when I click on submit, this creates my Lightning component bundle. Why is it called a bundle? Because it is a package of a lot of files, 8 files here. We'll talk about what these are, but right now it's important. You remember how it was Apex : page for Visualforce pages? Now here we are under the Aura framework. We have created a Lightning Aura component, right? So you get the Aura : facet, and then you can use the component tag. This is your header tag, right? And based on whatever we chose, it implements some of those interfaces. So it says that your component is hostable and on the entire application. Your component can act as a flexi page for all page types. It can act as a flexi page for the record detail page. It can act, it has the record ID because you might be using it on a record detail page. So it automatically stores the record ID if you implement this particular interface. So that's inheritance, right? And then you have force community available for all page types, which means it is exposed to the community users if you want to use it. And lastly, force : Lightning quick action, which means you can create a quick action out of it, right? And access is set to global by default, which means it is available all throughout the org. That's the basic setting. You can even write this up if you know what interfaces to implement. You can remove this and you can write it yourself, or else even this should be the bare minimum requirement of creating a component, right? Now if you notice, this is the component. I'll go through the structure in a while, but for now, if we see, this is the component, and if I say hello world and save it, with Visualforce pages, we had a preview button, but we do not have a preview button with components because they are not standalone. They come inside the application, right? Because an application is built up of different components. So in order to test this out, what we have to do is we can either push this into a specific location on Salesforce somewhere here, or else for quick testing, we can simply say new lightning application, and I'll just say addition component app. I'll say submit. Now this creates an application, a lightning out dependency application, right? And here what I can do is I can embed my Aura component here. So this would look something like this, and I'll say save, right? So you use C to say that, you know, I want to call this particular Aura component and embed it in here. All right. Now, once you have the application created, you get the button for the application, because you can preview a page in Classic and you can preview an application in Lightning. So when I click on preview, you see hello world here with some level of font, better than Visualforce, if you remember. And if you see, all we had to do was create an application and then create a component with some text on it. Cool. Now, if you notice, even this supports your standard HTML, which is the basic generic HTML. If I save this here and if I go back here and say refresh, so you see the bold characteristics coming here, right? Now what I want to do here is I want to show you an output, right? So again, the merge field concept works here as well. So you can use the merge field concept and you can display something like this, output text. You can do something like this, right? But here you have two different variations. You can either use the V dot or the C dot. Now what are these two models? V dot is basically for the view and C dot is for the controller, right? Now if I simply say V dot output text, I am trying to say that this is what I want to display on the screen, and this is something that I would fetch from my client side controllers or my server side controllers, but I have an attribute that I want to display. So what you have to do is you have to define the attribute by using Aura attribute. Name equals output text, type equals string, because this is a text type, so you can just define it as string, right? And I'll close the attribute tag. Now v.output text can show me what is the value. Now currently if I preview this and I say refresh, I don't see, okay, this is showing me, I think it's not refreshed yet. Refresh, let's save it. Yeah, now let's refresh. So it's not showing me anything, right? Because output text is a attribute, but it does not contain anything. Now if I just set a default value and I say hello skept and I say save, now if I refresh my view, it will give me hello skept, right? That's the default value, right? And if you see, v dot is helping the component understand this is what I want to view, right? But if you want to, let's say, call a event listener, like, you know, if this particular button is clicked, I want to call an action that would go to the client JavaScript, you would define something like this. Do this. So this means go to the controller, the client side controller, and do this. This would be an action that you would be doing. It won't be an output, right? So that's the difference between v dot and c dot, right? So let's do this. I'll call this input 1 and I'll mark this as an integer, and default I'll leave empty, and I'll create one more, right? I want to create two attributes to show a simple addition, right? So I'll say input 2. All right, these are the two attributes that I've defined. You can consider them as variables, right? And now here I can simply say div remember how we had Apex colon input field? Similarly, you have lightning input, or, you know, lightning interface related, lightning namespace related components here. All these components are available under the lightning interface. So what you can do is you can simply go to lightning colon input, and you can see the developer guide that opens up has all the elements, whatever you want. So I'll just name it input 1 and I'll say value, and I'll bind this value. How do I bind it? Here I'll say merge field v dot input 1. So whatever will be inserted in this particular lightning input will be stored in this particular attribute, right? And similarly, I'll put one more attribute here, and that would be input 2, correct? So I'll say input 2, and this should be input 2, and I'll save it. right? Once I save it, let's go and see and refresh. How does it look like? So it shows me 2 sample buttons, right? Input fields, but it has no styling at all. So in order to add some styling, we can use the class tag. So that adds SLDS, or rather the CSS styles. Where do you find it? You can find it by simply typing SLDS. This is nothing but Salesforce Lightning Design System. So Salesforce is inherited or rather inbuilt implicit CSS. Right now, what do I want? I want to, let's say, add some padding or rather spacing. So I can simply search for it here. I want to add some margin. I can simply search it here. So I'll say margin, and under margin, I'll see all the available options are there. What kind of margin do you want? Do you want it all around? Do you want it on the right side or somewhere? So I'll say location around, and under around, you see this dotted lines. It shows that, this would be the kind of margin you get. So I am looking for something a bit more bigger. So I'll just choose the SLDS-M around large. So I'll just take this class and I'll push this class here for both of them, and I'll say save. Cool. So if you notice, SLDS-M around, this is for margin around, and what's the size? It would be underscore large. So this is a block element modifier. So BEM model, block element modifier. So now you have 2 inputs, and I would like to give them a label, enter first value, and then this should be enter second value. Save. Right now, once I have this saved, I'll say refresh. Let's see how things look like now. So it shows me this value and it showed me this, but there's no spacing or nothing is working, right? And before I move into that, but I wanted to show you this particular guide here, right? So we use lightning : input. Now let's say you want a date time format. So you can go with date or date time format. As you click on this, you get the options that are available, and like I said, these are out of the box components, right? So you can simply go to this code and you can drag this code and you can just paste it. So the type date time will ensure that you get a date time format. You get something like this. You can select the date and time, or if you want a disabled one, you can take a look at all the lines and you can see which one works for you. So let's say you want to go for text input, so I'll go for text input, right? But for us, we wanted number input, right? Where is the number input? This one right here. So if you see, enter a number, this is what we want, and this is probably what we have done. So lightning input, name and label, right? It says type equal to number, so I can just put that here. So I'll say type equals number. This will ensure automatically that no strings are entered, no unnecessary things are entered. It is just plain number. Once I save it and I go back here and refresh, so if I try to press A, B, C, D, nothing works, but when I try to press numbers, it lets me add numbers, right? So if I say 12 and if I put the arrow key, it lets me add or minus also, right? So I can do that. But if you notice, I have added some styling that is not working, right? Now this is because we are on a Lightning application here. So we have to extend the SLDS functionality, and only then we'll be allowed to use this particular SLDS class. And if you notice now, things have changed and the UI looks different. So what did we do? If you notice, on the component level, we implemented inherit interfaces, right? Those were interfaces. Like if you are familiar with the basic OOPS concept, those were interfaces that you implemented, so many of them. But you would have to extend the Force SLDS library for your component to be able to understand that SLDS exists and your application to allow SLDS framework to work, right? This is only because you are on a Lightning application which is on this particular out dependency. But if you use your Lightning application somewhere inside your Lightning experience, it will automatically work because you're already embedded into an application, right? So it will work automatically. This is just because we have created a dummy application from the developer console just to test things. All right. Now what we have on the screen, we have enter first value, we have enter second value. What we need is a button, right? An add button. So how do I add a button? Instead of writing it all myself, I can just simply go here and I can try to find out where the button is. So all the components are available here. I see the button one here. So I'll click on button and I just want a basic button, and you can choose any one of them. Let's say I want to go with the third one. I'll just take the third code from here, which is of the type brand, and I can just simply copy this particular code, go back to dev console and paste it here and say that variant is brand, the label should be add these numbers, right? And the title would be add. And on click is an event listener. We talked about event driven architecture, right? So on click, what do you want to happen when the button is clicked? You want these numbers to be added, right? So we'll just say handle addition. And if you now notice, the values here are v dot input 1, v dot input 2, which has nothing but view, which means you'll see them on the screen, whereas this is c dot, which means it's trying to say handle addition is a method that has to be, called from the client side controller. So it says on click, go to handle addition method on the controller, which is still not defined. We'll define it soon. Let's save this, and now let's go back to our component and say refresh. So we see our button, but it is not properly spaced. So what I can do is I can take this class out of here, and I can just give it to all the elements by giving it to the parent div, right? So if I give it here and I take this div out and I move this div here down below, so all my elements should have the spacing because this is a class on the top level, right? Now let's save it, and now let's refresh. Right, I see some spacing, but there's issue with the lightning button. So let's do something. Class equals, what do I want? I want some spacing between these two guys, right? So what I can do is I can either give some spacing bottom for this guy, or I can add some top spacing or top margin or top padding for this guy. So I'll just go back, and here I'll just say location bottom, and I'll just choose probably the medium one. This should be fine. And because I'm choosing the bottom margin, I would be giving it to the number field, right? So I'll have to add a class here. Right, this is my SLDS class, the styling. And once this is saved and now I refresh, I should see some spacing coming between these two guys. So you see some spacing has come up, right? If you notice, this is nothing that we have created. This is all from Salesforce, the SLDS library. This is all the styling available, and these Aura components or Lightning components that we embed, these base components are also all available in the Lightning documentation here, right? So you can simply type Lightning components guide. So you'll get all the components under the Aura component framework. Okay. So this is what we have, and now the component is ready. Right? The component is nothing but the view, what you see on the screen. This is the component, the layout, the structure, how things will look like, right? And this is made up of attributes and these base components. So whatever you want to bind has to be defined as an attribute, right? Or else how do you understand what would be the value? And now once we have these values, we'll be using them in our controller. So that brings me to the client side controller. Now if you notice Aura component, what was the thing with Visualforce pages? We defined a controller here, right? A custom controller. We do the same thing here, but it's just that you keep it here, but it is not mandatory, because you can just work with the client side also. And if needed, you can make your server call. And if you want to make a server call, you can define a controller and you can set a Apex class associated with it. Okay, right now we'll not be using the server call at all. We'll just be using some calculations, and we'll be showing information on the screen on this particular component. Okay, so what I'll do is after this div, I'll just say div, and I'll just say lightning output. So let's see if I see an output option. Do I have an output text or something like that? Let's go here and see there's one output field, right? So I'll just choose this output field. This is with a record view form. So instead of that, I'll just see if I have something. Let's just do something. Instead of any field, I'll just put a normal field out addition answer, right? So I'll just display this value here, right? Currently it won't have any value because the addition is not done yet. So I'll just create one more variable, or rather attribute, and I'll call it addition answer. Whatever you want to show on the screen in the Aura component, you have to define it as an attribute, or else it will fail. Your component compilation will fail. Okay, now let's see how our component looks like. Refresh. So the field is somewhere here, but it is not showing anything because it does not hold any value, right? Now as soon as it holds a value, we'll start seeing the value. Okay, so we'll see how that works. So now that our component is ready, let's go to the controller. So this is Control-Shift-1 is just a shortcode for creating a component. You can say Control-Shift-2 or Command-Shift-2 on a Mac to create the controller and all the respective files. I'll be creating the controller which is directly associated or connected to the component. So see, I clicked on the controller and this created an automated name, addition component comp controller.js. So if you see, this is the .cmp file, which is the component. This is the .js file, which is JavaScript file. And if you notice, this is JavaScript annotation. It's given you a template. You can write an action name, and this is how the function would look like. It can take whatever is on the component, it can fire events, and it can call the helper, which is this one right here. Okay, now what was our event listener? It was onClick handle addition. So I'll copy this name. This is the method I want to call, right? So I'll go back to JS and I'll paste it here. And inside I'll say alert. So I'm writing JavaScript code now. So if you notice, I wrote HTML kind of code here, and now I'm writing JavaScript code. So I'll say, instead of alert, I'll say var input1 equals var input2 equals, right? Now I'm writing JavaScript code. So I want both the inputs that I got from the screen. Let's say the user input 5 here and 3 here. How do I receive that on my? Now when I hit the button, what will happen is, when I hit the button, this handle addition method will be called, and this will reach here on this controller, and this method will reach here and it will try to get the input. Now how do I get the input from my component? I can simply say component.get, right? And what's the attribute name? The attribute name is input1, but since it's a view attribute, I have to call it v.input1, right? What was the name of the component? It was input1, right? So I just said whatever is in v.input1, the value that is bind here, I just want that information here. Okay, so I can simply say, you can use double quotes or single quotes, but ideally double quotes are fine. And here you will say component.get input2. All right, now this means as soon as you save this code, this says an error. What's the issue? There are 2 semicolons. I'll say save. Still an error. What's the issue? Oh, there's a space between input and 2. So I'll say save now. See, so the errors that JavaScript throws are very weird. So you'll have to figure out yourself what went wrong, because JavaScript does not give you debugging logs or any kind of proper console errors. You have to figure out what's an issue, because JavaScript is case sensitive. Okay, and JavaScript is type sensitive. Okay, so I just put a space here that gave me an error. I just added an extra semicolon that gave me an error, a very weird error, but I knew what did I do wrong, because there were just 2 lines. Okay, now if I click on that button, what will happen is input1 and input2 will have the values that are given on the component to these 2 fields, right? And now I can say var final answer is equal to input1 plus input2. Simple, right? And now what do I want to do? I want to send this information back to my component, right? To this variable here. How do I do it? Similar to how we said component.get, you can simply do component.set. So I'll say component.set. Now this takes 2 parameters. When you're getting information, you want just whatever is in a attribute, right? But when you're setting information, you want to say what attribute to set it to and what value to set it to, right? So we say v.addition answer. This is the name of our attribute, right? If you notice here, this is the name of our attribute. I'll just copy it and paste it to avoid any issues, and comma separated the final answer that I want to set it with. This is your syntax of getting information and setting information, right? Now let's go back and let's refresh and let's see if things are working. So I'll say 2, or rather 1 plus 1. So you see, I get 11. Whoa. So this is showing 11 because this is trying to do a string concatenation. So this is 1 and this is 1. It's trying to do a string concatenation. What do we have to do? We have to convert these values into integer, right? So to convert this into integer, you can simply search for it, or else you can simply say parse int. This is a method that allows you to convert string into an integer, right? So we'll just simply say parse int, and we'll just say convert these values into the integer value, right? And we'll store this information in the final answer. Now let's try to see, and let's refresh what the value comes up. So when I say 1 plus 1, this should say 2, right? So you're getting the value 2 here. So the issue was that, you know, the information that's coming from here is of type string, but it has to be converted, or rather passed into the integer type. That's a very basic JavaScript typecasting that we had to do, but yeah, that's how you can add, right? And now let's understand one more thing, how things are working. Now before doing that, let's do something. Instead of using this controller, I want to create the helper file, right? And here in this helper method, I'll say handle addition module. And here I'll just say I'll just pass the component, okay, and I'll save it. And what I want to do is I want to call this helper method from my controller. So what I can do is I'll just say helper dot handle addition module, and I'll pass the component. Okay, now this entire code moves from here to the helper file. Inside the helper file, we again write JavaScript. This is another file which is JS file if you notice. And now this is component.set initial answer is 3 additional answer. So now if I refresh and if I now try to run 2 plus 2, I get the same answer even though the controller code has shifted to helper. So what is internally happening? The component, the application is initially loaded. It has the component that is embedded, so the component is loaded. Now the component markup is loaded, which shows us two input variables, one is 1 and one is 2. We get to input the variables, and when we click on the add button, we get to call this method because on click listener is set, and that says handle addition. Where does this go? This immediately goes to the controller. So under the controller, it tries to find out where is this particular method named, which is handle addition. So it internally finds out this method is here. So it calls this method and sees, okay, this is in turn calling the helper file. This is another helper class, which is a JavaScript class, and it's calling this particular method here. So it goes to the helper file, searches for this method, and then executes what's here. And as this is executed, the component.set value sets the variable value with a value, and as soon as it gets a value, it is automatically rendered. You don't have to refresh it, no server calls, nothing. Right? Server calls are not needed because this is a plain arithmetic operation, but the rendering is without a refresh, if you notice, right? You don't have to refresh it all over again. Cool. If I say 2 plus 4 and say add, this is automatically changing the value, right? So that's how the Lightning component framework is working. Now let's go back to our use case and let's understand what are the different files on the Aura component bundle. We took a look at some of them, but we'll understand what are all these 8 files. If you notice, these are all the 8 files, right? So the first file is the component file. The component file is the only required resource in the bundle, which means your Aura components can exist only if the component file is created. You don't need anything else, right? And this contains the markup for the component or the application, and each bundle contains only one component or app resource, which means you can only have one component file. You cannot have multiple for a single component, right? That's very basic to be understood. The next one is the CSS styles. So it contains the styles for the component. Now if you notice, this is the style file, right? And if I click on the style file, you get this command available here. You can write your CSS here, but it is not a good practice. This is only required when you have a hard requirement and you're not able to solve that by using SLDS, right? Every design operation is available here and you can use it from here. But if there's a hard requirement that this has to be specifically here and that's not being achieved by SLDS, you come to this style file and you write some CSS here. Okay, you can simply say .this space .class name. Now this class name would be somewhere here. For example, we defined a class here, right? So you would say class name, I'll say font color, and I'll just say save. So I'll just take this class name, go to my CSS file, put the class name here, and I'll say text color is green. Let's see if this works. Okay, now if I refresh, so I don't see any changes, but let's see why is that so. Maybe the text color is not, maybe it's background color. Let's see. Background color is green. Yeah, text color was showing as red. So now if I refresh, I should see the changes. So you see, this is coming as a green background. Very weird, but just wanted to show you how this CSS is working. So it should only be used if SLDS is not able to fulfill your requirement. Okay, that is your style file. The next file is the controller file. This is your client-side controller, the controller file that we used, right? The client-side controller to handle whatever events you have on the component. So any kind of events that you define on the component are correspond to the client-side controller methods, right? The one that we just created. And the controller in turn calls the helper. This is another helper JavaScript file, and it contains functions that can be called from any JavaScript code in the components bundle. So ideally, the Route to take would be create a component, create the controller, and route all your methods or functions into the helper, because that's the ideal way to do it. That's a good cleaner way to do it. If you have everything here, you might not be able to segregate functionality, right? So instead, based on certain requirements, certain checks, you can call the helper methods and you can just bifurcate your functionality and do them on the helper. Keep all the mess on the helper file, not on the controller file. Okay, but both are JS files, which are JavaScript files. Design file. Design file is required for components which are used on the Lightning app builder, pages, experience builder, or flow builder. Now, like I said, design attributes are needed. When you create a design file, you're trying to say that, I would be using this component for a screen flow, maybe for a Lightning app builder, maybe, wherein I would be fetching some information from the current UI context and sending it back to my component. In that case, you have to set your design attributes here. Okay, so those attributes have to be defined here, and then you can use them on your screen wherever you want to, be it on the flow builder, be it on the app builder. Okay, that's your design file. Documentation, it's a sample code, and that tells about what kind of component has been created. It's a good idea to create the documentation file, have everything stored here, so that it is good for auditing and tracking purposes in later part of the project. Right, then you have something that's called renderer and SVG. So SVG file is nothing but any kind of custom icon or any kind of custom image that you're planning to use as a resource in your component has to be defined here, and then only you can use it. So you see those small icons, right, everywhere. If you notice, you have some icons here, maybe let's say this is an icon. So if you have to use this icon on your Lightning application, you have to define this icon, or set this icon on the SVG file, only then you can use it. Okay, even that is available on the Lightning design system. You can search for SVGs and you can find it here. Okay, lastly, the renderer. If I open the renderer file, or I create it rather, this is another JavaScript file. This is a JS file, and this is primarily used to override any kind of default behavior. Now what happens normally is when I click on this Aura component and I say refresh, this loads this component. We'll look at this lifecycle, but it loads the component, it initiates the DOM event, it calls the init method, and it does a bunch of things before you see things here. It's lightning fast, but it does a lot of things. Now if you want to change the default behavior of how things are behaving, and you want to change the lifecycle or play around with the lifecycle, the renderer file is the place to be. So on render method, or you have different methods here that you can write, and you can call them and you can play around with them. Okay, so that's your renderer file. So those were the 8 files that get created as part of the Aura component bundle, from which only the component file is the important one, or rather the required one. Okay, all your JavaScript code goes to the controller and the helper file. Cool. Now let's take a look at the lifecycle. So the Aura framework lifecycle is basically as soon as you hit refresh, or when you open the component tree is loaded, right? It says component tree because you might have chained components one inside the other, right? So it would load the entire stack, and then the init event will be fired. Now what is init event? I did not declare it here, but normally what you do is, if you want to call something, let me just go ahead and close all the extra files. The CSS guy, the Aura doc guy, the renderer guy. Yeah, that should be fine. Now here what happens is, as soon as the component is loaded, you have a provision to fetch information from the server, right? What if you wanted to show things from the server? What if you wanted to show a list? In that case, you want to call things before the page is loaded, right? In that case, you use the doInit method, and that's written like this: Aura handler name equals init, action equals this. I think value and action I always interchange, but let's see. And you call a JavaScript method from here. Let's see, this is saved, and this doInit method will be written on the controller. So what I would do is, I would create this method here, doInit, and this would be a function of all my 3 parameters, right? Let's go and copy this, and here I'll simply say alert component is about to be shown to you, just so we understand what is happening. Okay, now once this is saved and I refresh, so it did not work, probably because my assignment here is incorrect. So this would be c.doInit, and the value would be this, because that makes it a handler event. Now let's click on refresh. And if you now notice, see, it's loading and it says that the component is about to be shown to you. If I say close, the init method ran and then the UI came up, right? So which means as soon as the component tree is loaded, the init method is fired. This method right here, you have to have the name in it because the handler understands, okay, this is for the initialization. I have to fire it as soon as the component is loaded. And this is the name of the method. This can be anything. This can be anything. We normally just use the do init name so that it is clear that, you know, this is the initialization method. Okay. And this is defined on the controller here. And now what you can do is here on the controller, you can say helper.get account data. You can do that. You can just say helper.get related contacts from the current account that you got. You can say helper.send email again. You can say helper.create campaign. So all of this code would be, all of these methods would be defined on the helper class, and these helper classes will be connecting with the server side and communicating with them, right? That's how it would go. Let me get rid of this 4 things. Say save. Now let's go back to our cycle. So as soon as the tree is loaded, the init event is fired. We just saw that, right? And as soon as the init event is fired, the render event is called. Now the render event is called and then the after render event is called. Now if you notice, things are loading here, right? So that's basically rendering of things, right? Let's try something out. If I go to the renderer file here and if I want to override it, let's see if I can do this. Render function of component event handler okay, and let's see if I can put another method which is on render. Let's see, I'm just trying this out. We've not used it much, but once I say refresh, so you see the init method is fired and then the default rendering happening now, which means the render event is fired, and I don't see the on render event. Probably the event declaration is incorrect, right? So that's okay. So if you notice, after the init event is fired, the render event is fired. So if you want to do any kind of override behavior, so you can do the override, basically changing what is happening by default. You can make changes here if you want to change the behavior, right, of how things are loading, or you want to show something else or not, right? Ideally we normally don't use that. This is a very this comes in if there are hard and fast requirements, only then, or else should be fine. Okay, let's go back to the cycle. So after the render event is called, oh, this was the after render, this is not on render, that's why it did not run, right? So it has to be after render. So you can define it after render, only then it will run. Okay, then it will show you the, and once these methods are fired, that's when the DOM is rendered and it is ready to be interacted, and that's where we start using this screen. Let me refresh it one more time. I think I messed up the code a bit. So now see, I have rendered and I have overridden it, right? So nothing is working. So nothing is being shown because the default rendering is blocked now, because I've wrote just one alert statement, so nothing else is happening apart from that. So I'll just revert this and I'll say refresh. So now just my init method should fire and the default rendering should happen, and it shows me the markup, which means the component is ready to be interacted. So that's the entire life cycle. Cool. That was the entire Aura framework lifecycle. Now, how do you use Apex with this? You would simply just do something here on the component. You will say controller. You will define the controller, my component controller, and you will save it. And as soon as you save it, it will give an error because the Apex class does not exist. You can simply create one Apex class. Say OK. And here, if you have to use any method, let's say static list of string, similar to what we did with Visualforce, get contacts, right? Return. The only important thing I want to tell you here is, as part of this particular curriculum, is when you are returning or when you want to use a method that corresponds to a Lightning component, and your component might be wanting to access a method from your controller, you have to provide an annotation. What is that annotation? For this method to be visible to your Aura component, or rather your Aura controllers or helpers, you have to say this is Aura enabled. Only then you would be able to use the get contacts method, or else not. That's the important annotation you have to use with Aura. So every method that you use here, for example, you want to say you want to call the method here, right? So you want to do a server call here, server call to my comp controller. So when you want to do that, you have to ensure that the method that you are calling is Aura enabled, annotated, right? So you have to have that annotation, only then it will be able to find this method, or else it will not be able to find it. Cool. All right, I think based on what we have on the Platform Developer 1 curriculum, this is pretty much good information you would need.